Okay, my name is Pham Linh from class 10 English, and together with Ngô Thanh Tú and Trần Quang Khanh from our class, we will be discussing universal concerning problems that is war and conflict. So now I will be reading an article of war about its history, causes, types, and facts by Britannica. War, written by Joseph Frankel, Professor of Politics, University of Southampton, England, 1963 to 1978, author of The Making of Foreign Policy and others. Alternative title Warfare. War, in the popular sense, a conflict between political groups involving hostilities of considerable duration and magnitude. In the usage of social science, certain qualifications are added. Sociologists usually apply the term to such conflicts only if they're initiated and conducted in accordance with socially recognized forms. They treat war as an institution recognized in custom or in law. Military writers usually confine the term of hostilities in which the contending groups are sufficiently equal in power to render the outcome uncertain for a time. Armed conflicts of powerful states with isolated and powerless people are usually called pacifications, military expeditions, or explorations with small states. They're called interventions or reprisals, and with internal groups, rebellions or insurrections. Such incidents, if the resistance is sufficiently wrong or protracted, may achieve a magnitude that entitles them to the name war. In all ages, war has been an important topic of analysis. In the latter part of the 20th century, in the aftermath of two world wars, and in the shadow of nuclear, biological, and chemical holocaust, more was written on the subject than ever before. Endeavors to understand the nature of war, to formulate some theory of its causes, conduct, and prevention are of great importance, for theory shapes human expectations and determines human behavior. The various schools of theorists are generally aware of the profound influence they can exercise upon life, and their writings usually include a strong normative element for what accepted by politicians, their ideas that assume the characteristics of self-fulfilling prophecies. The analysis of war may be divided into several categories: philosophical, political, economic, technological, legal, sociological, and psychological. Approaches are frequently distinguished. These distinctions indicate the varying focuses of interest and the different analytical categories employed by the theoreticians, but most of the actual theories are mixed because war is an extremely complex social phenomenon that cannot be explained by any single factor or through any single approach. So, evolution of theories of war, then reflecting changes in the international system. Theories of war have passed through several phases in the course of the past 3 centuries. After the ending of the wars of religion, about the middle of the 17th century, wars were fought for the interest of individual sovereigns and were limited both in their objectives and in their scope. The art of maneuver became decisive. Not an analysis of war was couched accordingly in terms of strategies. The situation changed fundamentally with the outbreak of the French Revolution, which increased the size of forces from small professional to large conscript armies, and broadened the objectives of war to the ideals of the Revolution, ideals that appealed to the masses who were subject to conscriptions. In the relative order of post-Napoleonic Europe, the mainstream of theory returned to the idea of war as a rational, limited instrument of national policy. This approach was best articulated by the Prussian military theorist Karl von Clausewitz with his famous classic On War from 1832 to 37. World War I, which was total in character because it resulted in the mobilization of entire populations and economies for a prolonged period of time, did not fit into the Clausewitzian pattern of limited conflict, and it led to a renewal of other theories. These no longer regarded war as a rational instrument of state policy. Some theoreticians have gone even further, denying war any rational character whatsoever. To them, war is a calamity and social disaster, whether it is afflicted by one nation upon other or conceived of as afflicting humanity as a whole. The idea is not new. In the aftermath of Napoleonic Wars, it was articulated, for example, by Tolstoy in the concluding chapter of War and Peace, 1865 to 1869. In the second half of the 20th century, it gained new currency in peace research. Peace research concentrates on two areas, the analysis of the international system and the empirical study of the phenomenon of war. World War II and the subsequent evolution of weapons of mass destruction made the task of understanding the nature of war even more urgent. On the one hand, war had become an intractable social phenomenon, and the elimination of which seemed to be an essential precondition for the survival of mankind. On the other hand, the use of war as an instrument of policy was calculated in an unprecedented manner by the nuclear superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Clausewitz consciously defined war as a rational instrument of foreign policy, an act of violence intended to compel our opponent to fulfill our will. So the question is, what are the impacts of war, especially on children, an imperative to end war? Now is an article by Joanna Santa Barbara on www.ncbi. Younger readers of this journal may themselves have been exposed to war during their teen years. Much has been written on the subject in the last 2 decades: how war affects children, how to rehabilitate war-affected children, and how to make the experience of being in the war zone less damaging for children. Secondary prevention. However, while in the previous essay I considered ways to prevent specific wars, here I will consider a broader issue of replacing our present war system with a peace system. The impact of war on children. Listing the impacts of war is a sadly straightforward task. Death. Hundreds of thousands of children die of direct violence in war each year. They die as civilians caught in the violence of war, as combatants directly targeted, or in the course of ethnic cleansing. 2. Injury. Children suffer a range of war injuries. Certain weapons affect them particularly. A landmine explosion is more likely to kill or seriously injure a child than an adult. Thousands of children suffer landmine injuries each year. 3. Disability. Millions of children are disabled by war, many of whom have grossly inadequate access to rehabilitation services. A child may have to wait up to 10 years before having a prosthetic limb fitted. Children who survive landmine blasts rarely receive prostheses and are able to keep up with the continued growth of their limbs. 4. Illness. Conditions for maintenance of child health deteriorate in war. Nutrition, water safety, sanitation, housing, access to health services. There may be loss of immunity to disease vectors with popular movement. Refugee children are particularly vulnerable to the deadly combination of malnutrition and infectious illness. 5. Rape and prostitution of subsistence. These phenomena, which often occur in situations of war, ethnic cleansing, and refugee life, leave lasting physical impacts in sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV/AIDS, psychological impacts, and changes in life trajectory. 6. Psychological suffering. Children are exposed to situations of terror and horror during war, experiences that may leave enduring impacts in post-traumatic stress disorder. 7. Moral and spiritual impacts. The experience of indifference from the surrounding world, or worse still, malviolence may cause children to suffer loss of meaning in their construction of themselves in their world. 8. Social and cultural losses. Children may lose their community and its culture during war, sometimes having it reconstituted in refugee or diaspora situations. And the last one, child soldiers. It is estimated that there are tens of thousands of young people under 18 serving in militaries in about 60 countries. They are particularly vulnerable to all of the impacts listed above. Remedial strategies. First, making war less damaging to children. Secondary prevention. Rehabilitating children affected by war. Tertiary prevention. Imperative to end war. And the last one, it is time for health professionals to define war as a serious global public health problem. The public imperative is primary prevention, removing the vector of illness or making conditions unfavorable for survival of the vector. If a peace system can be devised for an entity as large, diverse, and populous as Europe, it can be devised at a global level. It would be naive to suggest that it is easily achievable, but it could be cynical in the light of the suffering of the war-affected children in the world to accept war as an inevitable part of the human condition. There are global networks, formal and informal, of health professionals who think in terms of eliminating war and who worked to accomplish this. So the IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, is such a network. A network with the same goal is Transcend, a peace and development network which includes several physicians. So as we can see, mankind has taken several steps to make effort to stop war in the world. That as this is a very concerning problems affecting children, affecting every people, every citizens, every mankind, especially children. So that is the end of our presentation.